acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land, this space where we are meeting this evening. The Menang people have been here on this Noongar Butcher for thousands of years. The connection they share with this place we call the Great Southern runs generations deep. It is with greatest respect that I acknowledge the Menang people and their elders, past, present and emerging. It's a real privilege to be here tonight, to come here together on these grounds. It's wonderful to be able to live here and to be here and read and be here with Brendan tonight. Thank you. Now, Brendan, you can't see the people that are here tonight, but just so you know, if everyone can give a round of applause. What a book! Goodness me. Like nothing I've read before, and a few of us were talking about that earlier. This has been fabulous. Yeah, how on earth did you come to writing about ghost trains?
Well, it was a coming together, and firstly, thank you so much for having me. I'm really honoured that you've chosen my book for your book club this month, so thank you, everybody. No, how I came to write the book, I think I was working on a previous novel at the time, and as happened, you know, occasionally I read an article about ghost trains in Eurasia, and so captivated my imagination that I put aside when I was working on just for a couple of nights, and I just let my imagination run wild, and I very quickly came up with a little arc of a ghost train appearing on the old abandoned, you know, tram lines around Hobart. And then I tucked it away and I promptly forgot about it, and that's what I do. I suppose a lot of writers do, you collect little bits and pieces along the way, but I had no character in mind, no motivation, nothing more except this phenomenon. And then it was later, and I can elaborate on this a little bit down the road, but it was when I was able to merge it together with another question that came out that I felt like I might be able to find a place for the story. So that was the starting point. It's an article.
What did the train look like in your mind when you read that article? Did you have a clear picture of a train that you wanted to work with, or were you still looking at it as what was articulated to you in that article?
No. It was nothing more than any train that you might think would be ghost. There was nothing unique about it, except the idea that it might appear. And it was only when I really understood what the essence of the story was to me that, and then I needed to really think about how I wanted to portray this train, that I was able to start drafting it. And it very much was an entity that came to laugh through the drafting process, and the more ominous or sentient it seemed, the more I went after that. That was not something I could have imagined at the beginning.
Right. Okay, so that was a very organic thing. The presence of the train grew as the story developed. Yeah.
Yes.
So, before we jump more into the book, tell us a little bit about young Brendan. What were you like as a kid?
Well, you may have picked up from my accent that I'm from South Africa.
Yes.
And so, you know, I was born in Durban. And I think I was a very sporty boy. I love playing more sports. But from as early as I can remember, I had this love of reading. Yeah. And that was something that was really nurtured into me as a result of my parents. So I would say that there was this, there were these two traits in me. The one that wanted to be out there and be interacting with friends and playing sports, and the other that wanted to kind of, you know, hide in my room and lie on my bed and read stories.
Yeah. What kind of things did you read when you were younger? What did you enjoy?
I mean, I read those kinds of stories that I suppose children of my generation read Ian Blatt and all of those sorts of facets. I think the important thing for me was, my parents divorced when I was 5 years old. Or maybe, when I was 5, I can remember really living apart. And we stayed with my mother, and every second weekend my father would pick my brother and I up, and we had this incredible routine where we would go to town on a Saturday morning and we would go to a bookstore, and we would spend 1 or 2 hours there, and we would just be perusing, and we would all hide in our own little corners, and at the end of that we would all walk away with one book. And then we would go to the Wimpy, and we would have a toasted cheese sandwich and a milkshake, and then we'd come home and we'd read the book that we had bought that day, and it became an absolute pleasure. And I don't remember any specific favourite authors or titles, except that I just loved reading. And then with my mother, we moved around a lot, so when we moved into a new suburb, the first thing we did is we found the local library, and we've always had 3 or 4 books on our bedside tables. So I think through that, those years, what I was reading was almost incidental. I just needed to always be in some kind of story.
Yes, yeah. And that sounds like a real ritual for you too, books. Spending that time with your father and siblings, going to these bookshops. Yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
So, what about as an adult? What kind of books do you like to read now that you're grown up?
Well, I think if I wind it back a little bit, I think in my early 20s was when I first started reading very selectively. And the book that did it to me, which this is 25 years ago, 26 years ago, when I really understood that I wanted to write. I was living in London in my first year after university, and I was walking with a friend to Waterstones because he wanted to get a book from a writer that he heard a lot about and who had never read and who I had never heard about. And it was Charles Bukowski, and it was Post Office.
Oh, fabulous! Oh my gosh! Yeah.
So we walked in, and simply on his need to read this book, I bought it to him. And no other book had ever done what that book did to me. I mean, even the acknowledgement, this is a book of fiction and dedicated to nobody.
Yeah.
The first line, it began as a mistake.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, this is what words can do. And so I then had to just simply read everything he's written, prose, poetry.
Yeah.
And so that was the first book. I must say I still read it. But these days, I think I pulled out four books that who these writers I think are really writing, well maybe not one thing, but writing their prime. I still think they're writing their best work. The one is Susanna Clarke, Berenice, and stunning. It's difficult because she's only written the 2 novels that I'm aware of, and there's such a length of time between them because of her own struggle in terms of her health.
Yeah.
But I would read anything she writes. Siakam writes Convenience Store Women, Earthlings, and Willie Loughton is someone that I'm very interested in at the moment. So I don't know if you've heard of it.
No, actually no, I haven't. What's a title of Willie's?
Well, the title I have in front of me is called Don't Step Out on Me. He's written about 7 books.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say any one of them is particularly a breakout novel, but there is something in, the way I write, or the way I enjoy usually reading is, by the rule of a scene, you get in really late and you get out early. You don't start at the door and you don't finish at the door. You really drop in where the action is, where the tension is. Whereas this writer is interesting to me because he never gets out and he never gets in. He just writes those passing moments. He would write someone arriving home. They would open the door of the car, they'd walk over to the house, they'd open the door, they'd go inside, they'd go to the kitchen, they'd take it. And in a way that is just has this absolute electricity to it, writing these simple passing beats. And so he's someone that I've become quite interested in, and I've read all his work now, and I would read, I'd read everything.
Does that sound a bit like Bukowski in that observational kind of?
Yes, I think that's interesting. I hadn't thought of it, but what appeals to me about Bukowski, it took me a long time to start writing in the novel form.
Yeah. For
my first 10 years I wrote screenplays. I was intimidated by the idea of a novel and, technical ability and command of language and style. And then you read Bukowski and he uses the vocabulary of a child and makes those sentences have like a lightning to them.
Yeah.
And I think that that's perhaps the similarity to Wouter, although Wouter's novels are a little quieter, which maybe what I am now is more appealing to me.
Okay, interesting. So, did you always want to be a writer? You've been writing for quite some time. It's been a bit of a preoccupation of yours outside of other jobs and things too, hasn't it? So was it something you always wanted to do?
Yes, no, actually, this is where the signal line, I think, is perhaps quite a personal story. I decided to start writing to replace another failed dream. I had aspirations to be a professional soccer player, and so I played all the representative levels, and I was good enough, like my character, Gio, to maybe justify having this dream, but I lacked the talent to realise it. And so it was useful because it paid for university, but I knew when I finished university, I was not kicking a ball again in my life. I couldn't play it socially, and the only other thing that I enjoyed doing was writing. At the time I was writing lyrics for a pianist, and it was the only other thing that I did that made me feel passionate. And so I thought, well, let me try. And I stopped playing soccer in November, December. I hid myself in my room, and I spent 2 months writing a book of short stories. Then I wrote 2 plays, and then I started writing a screenplay. And within 6 months, I was like, this is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. It doesn't matter if I'm good enough.
Right.
And the reason why, and then the novel before this, now never been published, the novel before this I spent 6.5 years on, roundly rejected. Right. And for the first time, 19 years, I started questioning writing and whether or not I could justify spending 3 hours a night on top of a full-time job doing something for 2 decades. And was it okay to keep doing that? Was being published the only thing that would validate that? That's the question, right? And I was still writing, but I spent about a year thinking about that question. And that's the question that I married to the ghost train, and ended exploring that question through the story of chasing a dream that is out of reach. And by the time I finished this novel, and by the way, it was 2.5 5 years before it got picked up. I totally thought this novel wouldn't be published, but I had satisfied myself that the act of writing was its own reward, and it's something that was going to.
I saw that written in another article in another interview you had done, where you talk exactly about that writing, you talked about the act of writing giving you such reward and being its own reward, and I thought that was really beautiful, because there's so much pressure. I mean, working in a bookstore, it's so prolific, there's so much that comes out. Like nowadays, if something's 5 years old, it's considered old, you know?
Yeah.
So much comes out, there's so much pressure on people to try and get published, and I thought that was really beautiful when we shared that amongst the group online, you know, that you had come to think of writing being its own reward, and that was enough for you, even if you didn't end up being published. But luckily you did, because we all thoroughly enjoyed reading this. Yeah, so I did wonder that actually reading this, because the themes were so strong. You talked a lot about time, you talked about pursuit of passion and following a dream no matter what. And I really did wonder, was this book a metaphor for your own journey? And I think you just answered that it is,
No, thank you. And I don't know what it was that made me want something. And I knew that when I stopped playing soccer, there was going to be this incredible vacuum of time in my life that needed to be filled by other things. And I'm very grateful for turning around and choosing something. And interestingly, when I did decide that it was going to be writing, and there had to be a passion for it, it couldn't just be a mechanical thing. But the reason that it appealed to me was that if I lacked the talent, and if I never got published, there wasn't a shelf life for that, like there is in athletics. You know, you can just, it's something that you can wake up to every day and suffer for, and make sacrifices for, and work on as a craft. But it took me 15 years to accept it. It's not. There was a lot of angst for 15 years. It took a lot of rejection to get to a place where you were at peace with it. I don't think I could ever have had the maturity or the insight to have understood that immediately.
Yes, okay. Yeah. So, looking at this ghost train is something really interesting, and we kind of touched on it earlier when we were speaking. So when you first came across this ghost train article, you were seeing the train as what was depicted to you, just a kind of cold, mechanical vehicle, very much inanimate and on the side of the dead and other world. But in your book, your ghost train is very much alive and it's almost sentient. So how did that happen? So we talked before and you said that your vision of the train was growing as you were writing the story, but why was it important for you for your ghost train to feel alive?
It was a process to get there, as I've intimated, but two things I would say. The first is, so firstly I thought that the train worked when I found out that I had someone who was questioning their direction. And then I look back at all my little folders and it's like, oh, there's that train thing. It's not standing out at me, it's sitting out amongst a lot of other things. And I was like, well, there's nothing more certain of its direction than a train on a track. So, so there could be nothing more elusive than something that's able to slip that path. And I thought there's something there that could work as an echo, as maybe a metaphor, but there was a resonance in that where, look, everything I write has some surreal elements. So I was never going to art geometry. There's always going to be just something else, a little bit ominous lurking around the edges. I don't like it to be central, but I like it to be there. I can't explain where that comes from. That's just the inner workings of the imagination. And I felt like that could work. But then what really activated it for me was when I realised that the person chasing the train, Sven, he was the perfect reflection to Geo. Here is someone 30 years old with a dream that is potentially within reach, and if it's not within reach, just out of reach. It might only take a little bit of luck or timing or perseverance to get there. And completely anxious about where he is. And here is someone 60 years old, twice his age, chasing something completely unattainable and absolutely at peace. And when I understood that, it was quite easy for me to then think of the train as something that was ominous. And I must say, through the drafting, there would be like another line, another sort of description, describing it as a breathing bull or, a yo-yo of light drop from the sky.
So, before I continue, I've got lots of questions here, but does anybody in the audience have a question they would like to ask Brendan? No pressure, I've got
No thinking. I just thoroughly enjoyed the book. I thought it was brilliant, absolutely brilliant, and it's not something that I would normally gravitate towards. And it was almost like I was on a train going through each page. It was brilliant. Yeah.
I'm not sure if you were able to hear that, Brendan. Did you hear much of that?
Could you paraphrase the second bit?
We were just marvelling at the motion in the book, and reading this book, it felt as if you were on a train. Like you really felt like you were part of the journey of the train. I agree with you completely. Yeah. It was a really beautiful book, and absolutely, it was definitely something that a lot of us had never read something like this before. And I must confess that I don't read a lot of fantasy-style books, so the paranormal aspect was something that stood out and why I chose it for the club, because I just thought that's so different to what I and I know many of us would usually read. And it was so, it was beautifully interwoven, like the paranormal aspects of this book, and there were some really amazing concepts that I want to ask you some questions about that too, like about the research we've done. Lots of different things, we've got crystals, we've got Ouija boards, we've got the dimensions of consciousness, we've got rainwater and the magic behind rainwater. It was all fabulous, but none of it felt out of place at all. You've really tied it all in and all felt like it needed to be there. It was all quite believable.
Thank you both for your kind response to the book. And we can go out and back and talk about the paranormal aspect, but the hardest thing when you're, particularly if you've been unpublished for so long, because I'm not thinking about where does this book sit in a bookstore,
yes.
Or does it even work. I've reached the point now where I felt like I was writing for myself, and if I can entertain myself, well, surely I'm not alone in the sort of things that intrigue me. But when I started querying this novel, the objection from agents, so there was a lot of interest, but it was a lot of sending more, don't know how this works. And it was because it's like, well, what is this? And I think
going to be, do you think that that's really far removed from what the experience ended up being?
I found it was a lot more about relationships than what I read on the back.
Yeah, stronger themes of
Yeah.
relationships came through. Yeah. I suppose that's one of a few other members who are here tonight who are watching the live stream had mentioned that they forgot actually that there were going to be supernatural aspects, and when those aspects came up, even though from the first page it talks about a ghost train, so you know it's there, and it does what you talked about in the action. It starts in the action, but still reading through, because it's all so beautifully interlaced, like this person, they forgot, oh my gosh, now there's a witch board, forgot that there was going to be such a supernatural element. But yeah, I don't know, I find that an interesting comment. I think it's not too far removed, but yeah. But it was a surprising read too. Yeah. You write so intimately about music, and that was a fabulous part of this experience, actually. Do you play yourself? Are you a musician?
No, not at all. And I've tried to be. And I've bought a piano, and then I've taken lessons, and the piano's gone out, and then I've played with the guitar, and I've taken lessons, and then picked up the guitar. No, I have no talent for music, except I wish that was my talent.
I can relate to that. I feel like that would be my one question with God, is that why can't I sing? My life is really good, but I feel like I can't sing. Yeah. So that's quite remarkable, because how did you do that then? How did you manage the authenticity?
I didn't. So basically, I have the trunks in there, don't know the notes.
Yes.
And then I know that I'm exploring this question of what it means to have a dream, and what it means to, and I needed someone who's questioning their talent, so I went in search of a talent, and I didn't want it to be a writer, no. And I didn't want it to be a sports person. And I thought that, I don't know how, but I decided upon a musician, and I very quickly, without any conscious thought, knew it had to be a classical musician. I had no rational explanation. It's one of those things that just was a feeling. But then, for practical reasons, it needed to be portable. It couldn't be a controversy. It had to be. So, and there was a violin, and then as I was kind of exploring the characters and learning about these instruments, the viola is considered the poorer cousin of the violin, and for my character who's in the shadow of his brother and his father, and then I'm like, oh boy, now I have to write about something I don't know anything about. And so now I'm writing, and while I'm writing, well, firstly, I'm not a listener of classical music, but 50% of the time that I drive in the car, I've got it on to classical music.
Yes.
So I just like having something in the background, but I couldn't pick out music.
Yeah.
I just like what I like, and then I might Shazam it, and then I'll listen to that. So it's something that is just creeping up on me, and so just without getting into it too much, I don't think it's that interesting. But I tend to have a drafting process that I follow, where the first draft is not a first draft. I just call it a zero draft or a junk draft or whatever.
Yeah.
Where I just write it out.
Get it out of you, yeah.
Yes. Yeah, and things change, and then there's literally no rules with that. That is a very quick draft. With this novel minutes, the completed form is 81,000 words. My first draft was 150,000 words. Ooh. Right. And so Then the second draft that I do tends to be what I call a structure draft, where I try and find the shape of the story. And so I'm still editing sentences and I'm doing stuff, but once I've got a scene with its arc, I leave it and I move on. And then my third draft, I call it the authenticity draft or the research draft.
Yeah.
So if Sten's speaking English or Paco's speaking English or Camille's speaking English, how do they speak when they're English? If I've got someone busking, playing a piece of music and there's a violist, well, what's a piece of music that a violist would play solo? And is that part of the audition? And that's the hardest job. It's not even fun. You can be stuck on one scene for 3 weeks. You try to get it in, and so during I was listening, I was on YouTube, I was Spotify, anything. It was totally immersion. I was reading books. Tertius, the father of the modern viola and photography. So I just tried to consume everything. My neighbour is the bassoonist for the Tasmanian Symphony Orchestra. Hit with questions.
Yeah.
So it was just trying to immerse myself and getting those little details that can really activate it.
That's right, because you need it to, and it does read. It reads seasoned. It reads like this is something Gio and Wes have always done, even though Wes isn't doing it much during the book. Like it reads like there's a history to it, and it reads like there's a real familiarity to it. So I just totally applaud that. That's awesome that you're able to get that authenticity through, because it definitely reads like Gio absolutely knows that viola back to front, and the history is very real and palpable, and you believe when he's stressing over going to these auditions and things, you're there with him and you feel, it feels very real.
It's interesting because, like little anecdotes that my neighbour was telling me, like he's heard stories of people going to an audition and being told to stop after 12 seconds. And that when you win a place, you don't win a place in an orchestra. You win an opportunity to play for a period of time to see if you'll be a fit.
Right.
With the chemistry. These are the things that you wouldn't have any idea about, and are quite useful, but also just quite interesting to learn. Artistic process of something that is different to your own.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And people who are here tonight, is anybody here musical at all? No. Yes. Was this like a little bit of a foreign language almost, reading this musical experience for these characters?
I think it just, as you were saying, it takes you on a journey, doesn't it?
Takes you on a journey. Yeah. How do people feel about the reference to the music within the book? Because I was captivated by that.
Thanks to you sent it on
Spotify. I shared that around to the group. Yeah, the Spotify list. But how amazing is that? That was something that was very, very exciting to. Every time I read a page and saw reference to a song, to a piece of music, I needed to know what that felt like for the character. So I was quickly adding it to the Spotify playlist and wanted to be able to feel that, because these sorts of things, these artistic pursuits, they're so emotional, there's so much effect that they can have, that to know that a character was, that was directing Gio's movements, so that was influencing what he did or what he didn't do, or how they related to each other. I wanted to know what that sounded like, to get another nuance of what that felt like for them. That was great. Did you anticipate that at all? Did you think that people might reach into the music like that in this book?
No, and it surprised me when the book came out that there hasn't been one time where I've spoken about the book where that hasn't, been brought up. And so I feel very lucky about that. And again, again, it's one of those things where it was very much, it revealed itself in a very organic way. Even someone like Paco, who walks around with this guitar, that character, Paco and Camille I did include them in my acknowledgements. They are based on two actual people. Fruit picking season in Tasmania, there are always backpackers coming out, so you're always getting, and I lived in the Huron Valley at that time, so I was always picking up hitchhikers, you know, and I picked up this Paco and Camille character and was guitar with them. And and by the way, I know you haven't asked, but in the first draft, the Paco and Camille character did not exist. And in the first draft, Labuschagne was in one scene.
Is that how you say it?
Yeah.
Oh, I've been saying it wrong.
I've been saying it wrong too, but you've been saying it that way?
I'm from the same place as he.
Oh, okay. One of our book club members is also from South Africa.
Yeah. And Labuschagne is how most Australians would say it.
Exactly what I was saying, Labuschagne. Yeah. Wow. Can you say it again?
Labuschagne.
That's awesome.
Good man. Glad you know that freaking. Yeah, it's not a smooth word.
That's awesome. Sorry, I digress. Keep going.
No, it's interesting to me at least, which is really informative when you're up, you know, when you sort of you see how the process can be surprising. It allows you to be a lot more open with projects. But yeah, that Labuschagne character had one scene in the first draft. Paco and Camille didn't exist. And then my wife is also a writer. She was like, "You're an absolute fool if Labuschagne doesn't appear more."
Oh, well done. That's so true.
and then when I decided that Paco and Camille could all, that's when I was like, oh, I know what Kira's doing. He's putting these people between his brother, between him and his brother, as this buffer, this way to diffuse their tension. And then the book took on a tone that had that sort of cheeky, quirky quality that I just thought suddenly gave this whole new flavour to the novel. And I think that's when the novel started settling down. But to make the point that I think I wanted to make when I was speaking is everyone in the novel is desperate to have something, to get somewhere, or to get away from something. If you think of Wes's wife,
Yes.
they know exactly what they want, and it's not what they have. It's away from where they are, and yet Camille and Paco were very essential to represent that energy of just being here and wanting nothing more than the moment they're in as a counterpoint to that energy. And they were really useful because I felt like the energy was quite imbalanced otherwise.
Yeah, and the wonderment too in those two characters. You know, Camille and Paco reacted to things in very different ways, but it was both from a real place of wonder, wasn't it? They just kind of seemed to embrace everything that was presented to them. Yeah, that's interesting. And it balances out because the rest of the characters are so laden with the weight of the pursuit of what it is that they're chasing. Yeah. How deep into the paranormal did you go when you were researching for this book?
No, not deep. I worry about all my friends and family, to be honest. Look, it's my background is I was raised in strict evangelical Pentecostal household, church 3 times on a Sunday, youth group on a Friday night, talking about angels as there amongst us.
Yes.
Demons, this idea, you're just terrified basically the whole time. And, but this idea that there's this other dimension and it's just part of what we are and we here. And so obviously, not obviously, but in my adulthood I've not travelled away from that. But how do you step just back into the body? So I naturally am interested in things of a spiritual nature. I've never, and I would never dare to open a Ouija board in my life.
Yes.
I'm too scared of that, but I had fun running it. So, and it was useful, and it was also not done to tease. It was done with the sort of respect, and then, my neighbour is a psychic, and I saw her using a crystal, and so I bought myself a crystal, and wow, it moves. Clockwise, for yes, and anti-clockwise for no, and that became interesting. I thought that would be a useful device. And so, and again, through the drafting process, you just go after these things. And it took me 4.5 years to write. So if you're able to incubate something for that long, you can really push all those different elements further out than you otherwise might not.
Yeah. Were there any, because you did a lot of research for this, so were there any strange stories or things that you came across that, I don't know, was there something that would just hit you out there? I don't know, I just find it so interesting.
Yeah, not especially. If I do too much research, I can end up sleeping with the lights on for a few nights. Because my imagination is there. I'm prepared to just accept that there's something at my door that wants to do me damage. But through the writing of this, I saw a palm reader, I saw a tarot reader. I would have those experiences to sort of understand. But I just enjoy having those sorts of experiences as well. I'm naturally interested in consciousness. I'm naturally interested in maybe the idea that we are not our thoughts, that we are the awareness of our thoughts. Eckhart Tolle. So I like having those things sort of seep in through my practice. Because I'm naturally exploring those sorts of ideas.
And because he was a really interesting character in that sense, because he just was like almost like the gatekeeper to everything else that wasn't in the book, and you just know, when there's that moment where he has to make a telephone call because there's a ghost ship that was in Hong Kong, I think. Then you're just like, this is just one thing that Leviskakni is invested in. There's a whole lot more. I found that really interesting, that he was like the gatekeeper to so much more. And I love that this isn't all explained as well. Like, just as much with the ghost train, it just is. It's not, you don't give us a huge backstory to it. You don't rationalise or justify why it is. It just is. And that's.
My previous novel, which I spent over 6 years on, I wasn't able to sustain disbelief with it. And so I knew right away with this novel, how am I going to write this in a way where a reader assuming they're engaged with the story, would accept it. And because I had a couple of cracks I spent 10 years on certain projects and I couldn't do it, so I didn't think I would be able to pull it off with this novel. And the way that I did it, consciously at least, because there's so much that happens that is sort of out of your control, it's just luck, frankly. But the way that I did it consciously is I really, really wanted to focus on these characters' motivations. Who are they? What do they want? And I wanted to make them so real in their domestic situation, and then just matter-of-factly accept what's happening to them.
Yes.
And the situation. And there's a little bit of ways representing the straight person who's skeptical but not for long. And so I needed an event that could make this train tangible. And that was the train hitting, the person.
Yes.
That was, I was hoping that would be enough for the reader to accept a world in which this is a situation. And no one wants to acknowledge that, except for Stephen and Deb. So I think it worked, but I wasn't, because I'm in it, I wasn't confident it worked. I just am trusting what other people say.
Yeah. Which character came to you first then? Because you had this idea of the ghost train, you knew you wanted to work with that. Who appeared to you first?
Yes, so I know the answer to that, but with that previous novel, I had an idea. It's not a ghost train, it's something completely different, which so excited me that I just really started working on that concept right away. And then I just started creating characters almost as props. And it just didn't work, it just didn't feel human. So when we did that, I was going to use the ghost train to explore this question of talent and dreams. I put the ghost train aside, and I did not allow myself to look at it for about 6 months, and I went in search of characters. And the first character that I found, it's not obvious, but it was Sheila. It's the protagonist. I needed that. And then I went and I needed an antagonistic sort of force that was going to be the train, that was going to be Wes. So that seemed normal, and then all of my stories tend to be about broken families. My parents divorced, as I said, when I was very young. Amazing relationship with both of them. I can't trust them to read my novels and to not think it's based on us. And so there's a lot of caveats before I allow them to read, but then they still think this is totally autobiographical. And I've got a brother, and so how could he not possibly think this is about us? But I end up writing these stories and these books, and then I get like 3-4 months still, and I go, oh, it's that day. It's so that I think the two characters were interesting, but then the first character that excited me, I think, was Steph. I didn't know how I was going to write a 60-year-old man from Sweden who's been chasing something, and it just doesn't make sense. And how does he speak? And I don't know, he was the one voice that I got immediately, and I just knew how he thought, and he was really a gift.
Which he is to the rest of the characters in the book too. They refer to him as that, don't they? Yeah, that's interesting. So who was the hardest to
I really, without question, every time I did a draft, I worked so hard on her to respect her role.
Yeah.
Because she's the person who left and came here, and it was like, I didn't want it to be cliche, I didn't want her to be needy, I wanted her to be strong. I didn't know how to do it, and I kept getting it wrong, and then every time my wife would read a draft, I would just get the biggest telling off. You know, and it was just hard, and I think I finally just managed to sort of do it, but I still feel like I didn't do her justice. She was the most difficult. And then I think also Alessia, you know, because I don't know, I just felt like these two strong women were there just for him, and it just didn't work, and I didn't know how to do it, and I really was aware of it. In every draft, I was trying to give them, make them more independent and have purpose. And I think I learned a lot. I think in my next novel, I can already see that those supporting characters are, well, I'm certainly not struggling with them as early as I was with the others, but they were the hardest. Nikki wasn't difficult to me, I felt, but it was perhaps because it was quite conventional, I don't know.
Okay, that's interesting. Because she's going through the whole breakup, and that's interesting that she wasn't difficult, because I would have thought that would be difficult to write a woman who's really trying to break away and escape. You know, there's that point in the book where she's really lamenting to Gio that, you know, you are not stuck and I am completely stuck and there's no way out for me, kind of thing.
I don't think it's because, I personally, I just think it's because, you know, I have this incredibly close relationship with my mother, and I've seen her go through divorce, and I've seen her also have some long relationships, and you know, I've seen what she's got. So I think that there was an energy there where I witness, and I feel the pain even though it's not mine. So it's more that as opposed to her situation, I think. So
with Wes, and we do talk about spoilers here, so don't be alarmed with me mentioning this. But with Wes, who thought he would get on the train? Because I did.
Yeah.
I really thought that's it. He's getting on the train. This is his new purpose. Yeah. Did you ever consider putting him on the train?
No, but I knew he was going to move towards it, and that ending, the train was always, if anyone's been to Hobart, North Hobart, was always appearing outside the State Cinema in North Hobart. Okay, so, and I tried, I felt there was an energy in the scene. In fact, that's the little scene I'm going to read. I tried not to think about it until I got there. And then, I mean, I'm very careful about who I share this with. I'm just going to share it with a room of people. But when I write, particularly the very first draft, the first scene, not the crafting drafts.
The zero draft.
Oh, I lost you. Say that again.
Oh, sorry. The zero draft, the very first one?
Yeah. The zero draft. And I almost write it in a, like, not a hypnotic, but you try not to lead with your mind, with your conscious thought. You're trying to outrun, and the way that I write scenes is touch hard, and I know what the scene's about. So for example, the scene where Gio comes home and decides, I need to hurt with, and cleans up the rubbish, and then puts the rubbish back. So I knew he was going to clean up the rubbish, but I didn't know anything else. And then the way that I write it is that I will write it, and then I will sort of look ahead, and then I'll see it happening, and I just write what I see, right? Yeah. And then after he cleaned up the rubbish, I was like, what does he do now? And I just waited, and then he ran a bath. So, okay, well, he has a bath. And then the more he lies in the bath, the more he doubts himself, and then he calls Alessia, hoping that she'll confirm that he's done the right thing, and she's like, you've absolutely done the wrong thing. Put it out. So, for me, when I wrote that train scene, it was similar, where I was just following what everyone was doing. Yeah. And then when you're crafting it, then you just try and shape it into something that has an objective, a conflict and a disaster sort of part to it.
That, just mentioning the rubbish, there's a passage in the book quite early on where you say that Wes is connected to his father's rubbish just as Gio is connected to the viola. I know what that's about, but I'd love to hear you talk to that and Gio's connection, Wes's connection to his father and to the rubbish, and why he was so adamant that nothing could change. Like, could you unpack that about Wes a little bit?
Yeah, it's so every time I write a new project or a new novel, I try to take one craft element that was perhaps a weakness in the previous one, and that I'm writing generally, but I'm trying to, and in the previous novel, my characters didn't feel human. They didn't talk like people talk. It felt like we were reading a story with characters who were props at the mercy of a plot that was clever. Yeah. You know, I wrote something clever. It was impossible to connect emotionally with these characters. They simply didn't speak or behave or talk like humans. So my entire purpose here was to try and write characters that felt like people. And so the way that I went about that, and this does actually directly answer your question, is I was looking for characters with competing motivations. And the way that I thought that, because like my wife, right, if she just writes a character, in the first draft they just sound like human people. Whereas when I write, they just no human talks like my characters talk in the first draft. However, I've got a really instinctual feel for the story and flow. I don't need to plot it out. I just have this natural feeling of how it goes, whereas my wife actually has to really put a road in it, otherwise it loses its direction. So you're each working towards your own sort of instincts to feel. And I understood that if I could understand their outer motivations, which is what they want in the time frame of the story, and also the internal motivations, which is the reasons for that, and if I would have competing motivations where there was an organic conflict, then every single time they were in the scene together and they opened their mouths, there was conflict. And then I started thinking, okay, what scenes could I write that could amplify that? So a lot of those scenes were simply a desire on my part to create the most fraught stage to surface there. And the rubbish was not inspiration. That was there. And then I was like, well, it does work because he's stuck, you know, and it does work. So then you go with it, and I love this idea of, I don't know, every time I finished a writing session, I felt like I needed to take shower. The book just felt so dirty.
Well, I think it was a really interesting aspect to Wes and the tension between the brothers. I really felt for Wes. He was, well, I called him a truculent douchebag at one point when we were all texting back and forth on the closed group. You know, that there's that first bit where he's giving Nikki grief about what she served for dinner, and that it's not hard to throw a roast in the oven, and that enraged me. But he is actually a really sympathetic character. Like, he's just heartbroken. He's just an incredibly heartbroken character. And the rubbish is really interesting because he's just grabbing, it's almost like hoarding, like he's just grabbing onto anything that he can control because nothing else is in his control. It was a really interesting element, I thought. Yeah.
I didn't know if I could redeem him the whole way. I didn't know if I could. And I thought the only way I could potentially do it is if he lets me go and he lets Hayden go. But I thought, for a long time I thought it was too contrived. But the more I wrote him, the more I found things in him where I could sympathise with him, and it became easier, to write. But that was a difficult journey because I didn't like him, and I didn't know if that was important. And he was working, as being accountant to Geo, but I wanted. With anything I write, by the end, I want to have some respect for all of my characters.
Yeah.
I didn't know if I could, and I felt like by the end, I could respect it.
Yeah. Yeah. Does anybody have any questions before I continue on? No? I'm interested in the concept of killing your darlings for writers. I find that really interesting. Did you have to kill off many darlings in this book?
Yeah. I'm fairly good. Look, if someone came to me and said, "I think we'll have to go," no, like I would, like I can't do that, right?
Yeah.
But I'll tell you what, this is an insight that might be interesting, and was deeply traumatic to me at the time. So I finished writing, and before I start, I know you sort of talked about the plot of the Panther, such a complex question because even though that first draft I'm trying not to think too much, there are certain non-negotiable things that I want to know before I do that draft.
Right. Yeah.
So for example, I need to understand the outer, the inner motivations and conflicts for my characters. I just need to know on a basic level what they want and what is stopping them from getting that. But there's certain structural things that I want to know. And it's happened too many times where, after I finished this novel, I spent 2.5 years on a novel and then stopped. And then I started the novel I'm writing now. And so I do want to find out, if I can, if there's a novel in this. And so for me, there needs to be a foundation. So, and a very significant event is the midpoint event. And for my novels, in the signal line, Stem boards the train.
Yeah.
Okay? And in the same instance that Geo gets rejected at his audition. It's a clear midpoint situation. And in terms of narrative, where that's important to me, and this is not a rule for me, but I tend to want a character, whatever that midpoint event is that they go from being reactive to a situation where they can now be proactive to try and bring a resolution to whatever situation they found themselves in. Whereas at the beginning, they're just like reacting to whatever's happening around them. And so what I had done in my penultimate draft is Steph boarded the train, and I forgot about Steph. I elevated the subplots and went after the Messier Audrey house.
Right, yeah.
And Steph was just going to appear on the train, 100 pages later.
Yeah.
And again, I've got about 3 or 4 beta readers that are writers, and they're like, love the novel, you don't have a second half. And I had to rewrite the second half of the novel when I thought I was close to clearing it. And that's when I brought in the Kale or Cole or Mark or Luke or whatever character it is. That's when I brought in, Steph needs the bag, Steph's always been on the train. None of that existed until the very final draft, and I needed Geo to be reactive to what had been the main plot and not elevate the subplot,
Yes.
which would have been completely unsatisfying. And I only saw that when it was pointed out to me. So that was an example. And I lost a lot of scenes, music scenes, that I loved, that I would consider darlings, because I had to keep the balance of the main and the subplot in order.
So, you speak about beta readers. How many do you have? Do you like to have quite a few different eyes going through your work?
I've got 3 or 4. My best friend you may know is Rowan Wilson. Yeah, I met him in Japan like 18 years ago, before we were published, so we read each other's work all the time, we're on the phone all the time, and so unbelievable feedback you're getting, and then my wife writes, and then I've got 2 other writers.
Yeah.
So, and you choose them carefully because you've only got 1 or 2 reads. But after the second read, you stop seeing it. So I might use 1 for the first draft and then 1 for this draft, and yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
And if one of them's coming back and saying something fairly extreme, I might give it to another one. And whenever they're saying the same thing, it's futile arguing. They're right. They just are 100% right.
Yeah,
So.
I'm interested too with your, I forget, was it your publisher or your editor that you thank who got it from the beginning? And it's interesting that you mentioned before that not everybody got this concept, but where is it? Your editor, hang on, who is it?
My editor, Kate Goldsworthy.
Kate Goldsworthy, right, there we go. She so quickly understood the story I was trying to tell. So that's interesting. How was it that she just got it when you were kind of sharing it around and not everybody got it, but she got it? What was it that she got so quickly, do you think?
Oh, Kate is just extremely talented, and I was incredibly lucky to work with her. And Barry, the publisher at Charles & Allen, they use Kate for many of their books, and when she called me, she asked me to speak first before she started, and she wanted to know if I was open to certain structural, structural edits before she did the copy edits, and we spent an hour and a half on the phone, and you just know locked onto the fact that Audrey and Alicia weren't working. And I'm like, you picked that up right away, you didn't need anyone to. And so she gave me some suggestions over there, and the ending was too neat, and it still is too neat, but you should have seen it before. So she was fabulous, but her copy is extraordinary. I couldn't believe what she was able to pick up.
Yes, okay. Yeah. So, I'm interested, are these characters still with you on some level? Or now that you've finished your book and it's out there, have you put these characters to bed in your mind? Because I always find that interesting talking to different authors, how, some people have talked to us and said that they still carry parts of their characters with them, and then other authors have said, no, that's done, I've moved on, I've let that go. What do you feel about the characters in this book?
It's
a lot.
I think about that question a lot. It's difficult to answer. As a reader, characters live with me.
Yes.
So for example, it's embarrassing to say, but for the first time last year, I read Kazuo Ishiguro. First time. I read Clara and the Sun, and then I read Remains of the Day, and I'm like, this is the best novelist I've ever read in my life. And Stevens, that butler, is alive to me.
Yeah.
Or if you read Hani Yarigahara's A Little Laugh, I could still pick out those characters. Whereas my own characters that are alive to me in my imagination while I'm writing them, and then when I'm finished, I just couldn't be more dissatisfied with how I write them. And I had to read this novel after it was published, because it's published and you have to talk about it and you have to confront it. And I didn't like it. And now that time has passed, I read it again, and I wouldn't change a word. And I just want them to be there in the novel and flawed and beautiful to me, but it's difficult.
So what was it that you didn't like then on that first reading after it was published, and that was your gut response? You talk about the gut a lot in this book, so what was that, do you think, that your gut reaction was you were not satisfied?
Is that technically I wasn't good enough to respect them enough to write them down. It's a critical thing.
Yes.
Because when you're drafting, you're critiquing, you're improving, you're critiquing, and then you have to let it go at some point, right? And it's never as good as you hope. It's never as dark as you want. It's never as funny as you think. It's not as interesting. It's difficult after so many years. Whereas I can't imagine that Ishiguro doesn't read Remains of the Day and go, that's the greatest novel anyone ever read. But maybe he can't face it. I don't know. I remember Peter Carey saying he was in an interview with Ian McEwan and Paul Auster, and he was saying, Jennifer, she was asking if they read their work, and they were like, oh no, I've heard someone say, are you kidding? Once I've read it, I never look at it ever again. And Peter Carey's like, no, sometimes I lie there and line edit my old books. And Peter Carey and Ian McEwan are like, no, you can't torture yourself like that. So, I don't know, you listen to different writers, I just think it's a funny relationship you have with your work when it's finished.
So how do you feel about it being out there and being interpreted? So that was an interesting thing when we talked once with Craig Silvey. He feels very much, he remarked on it being no longer belonging to him, and it's out there.
Yeah.
It's there for people to interpret. And how do you feel?
I've heard Craig Silvey say that 100%, that I don't believe that when I am writing to do with.
Yeah.
It is the reader's response to, it's the communication between them. The fact that you wrote that work is, in my view, is irrelevant. It's not of any, it's not my business how that book speaks to someone, but all you can do is to feel absolutely honoured, even if someone hated it. I would rather that someone hated it and gave it 1 star that was,
Yeah.
take it or leave it, you know. So, but you don't get to choose that either. That's not your choice.
Yeah. Yeah. So, what is it that you're working on now?
Yes. Look, I'm going to have to be vague. I'm about 2 years into it, and I'm probably, if everything goes perfectly, a year and a half from just giving it to my agent, but I think I could be 2 years away from finishing it because, but basically, it's 7 homeworks. It's a family. It's this side of COVID, not that side.
Yeah.
And there is something ominous lurking around the edges, and I think that it's different. But I write stories that are set in towns and houses.
Yeah.
And I write stories where characters are trying to get away or return, and so it has that same dynamic. So I'm certainly having the same kind of joy writing it that I did with the signal line. So that's the only thing I need to know that it's working for me.
So, the ghost train and the signal line is a perpetual, continuous thing. Do you think you'll ever revisit this concept of ghost trains, or you know, these characters all had quite wonderful closure, it all wrapped up really quite well for the characters, but do you think you'll ever revisit this sort of thing again? Or
the theme, yes. It's simply because in different shades. No, the next story, for example, wouldn't be about dream, but it would be about family, and but no, there wouldn't be a ghost train. I certainly feel like that's behind me, but there are other phenomena that you can have fun with. So and I want to have fun with all of them at different points. But yeah, I like this week, I wrote a scene and there was a knock at the door, and like it was one of the characters from that novel. So
from this novel?
Yeah. There might be a cameo or two.
I like that.
It's telling you it's this world.
Yes, okay, yeah.
This is the reality. So yeah, but it's going to be set in the present.
Gosh, who knocks at the door, Brendan? No, you don't have to tell us, but that's awesome. Who do we think knocks at the door then? Who do we see out of this book that could continue on and do a cameo in something else? Gio's gone. Gio's in Rome having a wonderful time with Alicia. Wes, oh my God, just
I would
Wes
say
knocks at the door.
Stan.
You reckon Stan? Because linking to the paranormal. Ooh, that's interesting. Are we close? That's awesome. So no, you don't have to say anything, but that's awesome. I like that. I really enjoy cameos. What do people think? I love it when things do callbacks and relate back and link, circle round. I like it. Well, so what's next for you then, Brendan? novel?
Yeah, no, I have a full-time job as I always have, but every night between 9 to 12 I'm writing, so there's always going to be something in the works, and hopefully my agent and my publisher will like it, and there will be something around the corner.
9 o'clock at night until 12 midnight.
Yeah.
Gosh, so you don't need a great deal of sleep?
No, I'm always tired.
Yeah.
And the older I'm getting, man, I could write in my 20s and 30s when I was living in Japan, which is where I met my wife. She's Australian, that's why I'm here. And we were both teaching. And I worked from 1 o'clock to 9 o'clock at night, and then I used to write till 4 or 5 in the morning, and then sleep for 5 hours. So well, you can do it, you can survive. Yeah, and then now I'll do like about 8 or 9 days in a row, and then I need about 2 nights of going to bed at 8 o'clock. I'm just an old person now, so.
Well, would you be able to do a short reading for us now?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I love the scene that you've chosen, so please do. It's such a pleasure to be read to.
Absolutely. I just need to, whenever I laugh, my eyes water up and I won't be able to see the pages. It's a 2-page scene, and the reason why I chose this is because usually you have to avoid spoilers and choose something early. So I just thought for that reason it might be fun just to read this 2 pages where the ghost train finally appears in its glory outside the state cinema. So thank you. In the next moment, the light flashed in without a sound. Before I could register the situation, it stood before me. A mountain of billowing steam, shimmering in black. Stands ghost train outside the state cinema. Pedestrian street, some people scuttled away to watch from the safety of distance, while others hustled towards the train to see it more clearly. Behind me, patrons within the cinema foyer stood pressed to the window, wide-eyed and speechless. Mobile devices were pointed at the phenomenon. The train was huge and imposing, a breathing bull, and it hit me. My God, the ghost train. The front light was as stunning as I'd imagined from Bill Bright's accounts, large and pulsating like a full moon. The lead locomotive cast an ominous silhouette, and a thought flashed through my mind. So this is what a dream looks like. I edged towards the front carriage, concentrated and alert, wanting to stamp the image in my memory so that years later I'd be able to retrieve every detail. Knowing the train was seconds from vanishing, I tiptoed as far forward as I dared, a white glow from the final carriage indicating that the Atmos door to open. To my astonishment, a figure emerged from the crowd and strode purposefully towards the train. When I raised my hand to screen out the lights, I recognized it to Wes. At first I thought he was wanting to get a closer look, but from his demeanor I could quickly tell that he was intent on boarding the carriage with the open door. I shouted, ran towards him. Wes! It was enough to make him pause, and in that moment I had time to reach him. His body was taut, and when I grabbed his shoulders, he relaxed. A loud hiss emanated from the engine, and a puff of steam floated up towards the sky. I glanced along the front 2 carriages, and there in the window was Ted, looking back at us, ghostly pale. Sitting across from him was a woman, younger than him, whom I took to be his mother. He had done it. Sten had boarded his train, or as I was hoping suggested, he'd been on and off the train for 2 decades and had now found it again. I sensed a second movement. Exiting the state cinema with snail-like urgency was unmistakable. He made for the open door on the back carriage. I truly believed he was going to clamber aboard, so certain were his steps, and there were gasps from the people on the street. One person shouted, "Don't do it," but Labuschagne didn't falter. He pulled up short of the door and slid Sven's Gladstone bag into the carriage. He stepped back. In the next instant, Sven walked from the second carriage into the last carriage and collected his bag. He nodded at Labuschagne. I imagined the thought surfacing in his mind. Boy, this man is good. I thought he might get off, but he stood there with his bag, earnest and content. His eyes found mine, and a smile crept onto his lips. The carriage door closed, and the train rolled forward with a heavy chug. It advanced 50 metres, and all at once, carriage by carriage, vanished before our eyes. People gasped. A woman fainted, and the cars that had backed up behind the train erupted to the coughing and tooting. Then everyone began chattering, and those watching from behind the state foil window pulled away. Matthew or Mason or Robert or Rupert or Carl or Caleb or Cole all saw emerge from the crowd, his DSLR slung around his neck. We watched him amble away. Labuschagne patted Elizabeth on the back. Thank you both. We walked off down Elizabeth Street in the direction of Phantom Times. Thank you.
Yeah. And that investigator guy must have been fun to create, actually, with all of the names. What do people think of that, actually, that character? The Carl, gosh, he had a lot of
I think
names.
it just described him really well.
Yes.
No one really knew who he was. So
That's
it's just
right.
perfect.
He was just so, elusive, but right, finger on the pulse of everything, but yeah. That's fabulous. Does anyone have any final questions for Brendan? All pretty good? Well, thank you so much for being with us this evening, Brendan. There's so much more that we could continue to unpack in this book. There's a lot. But thank you for your time.
It's my pleasure and an absolute honour, and I just thank you so much for choosing the book again and for everyone for spending time with the story and my characters. Thank you.
Absolutely. And we look forward to the work that comes from you in the future. Maybe we can meet up again.
It would be lovely. Thanks so much for